President Clinton did send a letter to Gary Ellis, who was the then head of OPRR, the Office of Protection and Research Risks, telling him to enforce the rules that were in place. And when Gary used to tell the story about this, it was he got a letter from the president to do his job, and boy, he went out and did it. And so what followed had both, I think, a positive and a negative effect on how we think about research ethics and regulation, was that many institutions were shut down. At least their research programs were shut down. And I was at one. I was at Duke, and we were about the fourth institution that was closed. What was very interesting was when that letter came from OPR to Duke, and the research enterprise needed to stop. I got a lot of emails that day, and email was just growing in its popularity, but I got more than I had ever received. I thought there was something wrong with the server, or something had gone wrong. And from the outside looking in, you say, well, Jeremy does all this research ethics nationally. What? Should I call him? Is he going to be looking for a job? Maybe I'll be a short order cook or something, because maybe I shouldn't call Jeremy today. Not a good day to call. But in fact, I hadn't been involved, and that was one of the problems we had at Duke, is that here I was developing at least national and growing international reputation for my work in research ethics. But when the folks came in as a compliance matter to investigate what we were doing, I wasn't brought into the conversation. Well, once we were closed, I was sure brought into the conversation in a way that was rapid. We put together a task force. The Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs put together a task force, and it was a command performance. And that was very, very interesting and very difficult work to do. Because all of a sudden a task force had to then revamp and look at how research ethics was structured, and educate the investigators and educate the IRBs and change an entire structure. It was clear when OPRR closed Duke that, similar to a tort signal, went around the country and people really paid attention. We ended up working very hard with the task force of mostly people who are much older than me in that room most of the time. And interns don't look good in their 20s when they stay up for a few days in a row. And deans and chairmen look even worse. And we went and met with OPRR a few days later, and the suspension was lifted with the need to conduct an educational program and to radically support the IRB. And I became deeply involved in that effort, and it was sort of my worst nightmare, was I was told I had to be the guy to give the ethics talk that everyone needed to attend before they could do research again. Now that's not a job you want. Giving the fire extinguisher talk or the sexual harassment talk or any kind of required compliance training is like the worst job possible, because no one likes to go to required trainings for anything. Now, is it important that we know how to use fire extinguishers? Absolutely. No sexual harassment? Absolutely. Research ethics? Absolutely. But the person giving the talk, not a great job. But the dean came to every one of the talks and explained that I was just the messenger, and that the shots needed to be fired to the institution. And when the institution stepped up and realized that, it was a changing culture. That was fascinating to observe, and even more important for how things changed. I gave that talk I don't know how many times. It's the same talk that is now the bulk of the training programs from around the country and in parts of the world about the basic history and ethics of human subjects research. We did it live. It was the time before web-based modules and the like, but a really interesting event. And what I learned in that moment was that we rushed to evaluate it. I was so worried that people were going to hate it. We didn't think to pull out the standard meeting evaluation form, just borrowing the items. We invented our own, and we forgot to put in, what did you like best? People filled that thing out, and the free-flowing comments that we read were amazing, because they said, I never had this before. I didn't know that history. That makes sense to think about ethical principles in research. And what you realize is that the people who are conducting research, most of them anyway, are smart and well-intentioned, but they hadn't been trained in the ethics of human subjects research. Similarly, IRB members weren't trained in the same way. They were given chapter and verse and told to interpret it themselves. And it wasn't necessarily pretty. But once they understood the rationale, things changed, and things changed for the better. People would actually solicit advice about trial design and informed consent and a variety of issues. And so that piece was, I think, really important to understand and remember that most of the folks in this business, if you will, are in it for the right reasons.